What is distinctive of looking at a picture? What is distinctive of the experience that we have when we understand what a picture represents with our eyes, so to say? Some people have said that if you want to understand what a picture is or how a picture represents, you need to ask those questions about our experience of the picture. So the conception of picture seeing comes first in the order of explanation, so to say. So what is picture seeing? There's a term that philosophers have introduced to talk about that experience of looking at a picture and understanding a picture with the eyes. The term is seeing in, and it's often hyphenated to indicate that we're dealing with something quite special here. So in ordinary situations, we often say that you see something in something else. I can see people in the room, or I can see a pair of shoes in a shoebox. But none of these experiences has to do with representation or pictures. So when we talk about seeing in, where it's hyphenated, we're really talking about this distinctive experience that we have when we see things in pictures. Think of seeing in as just something like a label that philosophers use to talk about that distinctive experience of pictures. So really a central question is, what is the nature of seeing in? And many of the theories of pictorial representation that tell you something about picture experience or picture seeing are in effect theories of the nature of seeing in. And I want to say something about two different ways to approach that phenomena of seeing in, because there are two things you can say about it. On the one hand, you can approach seeing in by way of analyzing it in terms of other experiences or mental states. On the other hand, you can resist that kind of analysis. These are really the two things I want to contrast. So let me say a little bit more about that. So when you analyze a phenomena, what you do is show how it is somehow composed out of simpler elements. That's really the core of the analytic project. So when we analyze seeing in into simpler elements, what we do is we identify other experiences or mental states and say, well, if you take those experiences or mental states and put them together in the right way, you get a state of seeing in. So let's look at one example of how this works. And this is Kendall Walton's theory of seeing in as make-believe. So according to Walton, what you need to be in a state of seeing something in a picture is actually just two things: an ordinary perception, visual perception, and a state of imagining. So this is how that works. If you look at a landscape painting and you see a tree in that painting, then what actually is going on, according to Walton, is that you've got an ordinary visual perception of a painting, of a piece of canvas with some paint on it, but you imagine of that perception that it is a perception of a bunch of trees. So in a way you pretend of your perception that it is something it is not. That is, according to Walton, what is distinctive of seeing in. So you should ask yourself whether you'd find this a plausible answer to the question, what is distinctive of seeing in? But here it's good to note that it takes the form of an analysis. So we say of seeing in that it is actually a combination of other mental states and experiences, where those experiences and mental states are much better understood. And that is why this answer is somehow clarificatory or illuminating of what seeing in is. On the other hand, you could resist that kind of analysis and you could say, look, we don't really have any need for an analysis of ordinary perception. As soon as we ask ourselves what ordinary perception is, we might just draw a blank and say, well, we all know that. There really is nothing more to say. Ordinary seeing is just something that we human beings are capable of, accepted as a matter of natural or empirical fact. And although we can characterize what ordinary seeing is like, don't expect that we can somehow pull it apart into simpler elements that are put together in a certain way to illuminate what ordinary seeing is. That would really be an approach to ordinary seeing that takes it as something like a mental primitive, something we can just do as human beings. And there are lots of those primitives. We are able to imagine. We are able to exercise our will. We are able to move our body. None of these things seem to allow for a kind of analysis into simpler components. So now we can approach seeing in exactly that way, and this is what Richard Wollheim does in his work, and I'll put an article in the link below. So according to Wollheim, if you look at the kinds of experiences that human beings are capable of, seeing in is just one of them. We are capable of representational seeing, and when we engage with pictures, that is exactly what we do. There's no way we can take apart that representational seeing and analyze it into simpler components. That's just not how it works. It is a unity that comes to us naturally. What we can do, according to Wollheim, is characterize it in various ways. So describe what it is like to be in such an experiential state. And according to Wollheim, what you can say, for example, is that it has two layers or two folds of visual experience. So on the one hand, we have visual experience of the paint and the surface in front of us. On the other hand, we have visual experience of the things that are represented, the tree and the landscape that we see in the painting. And these two elements come together in a single experience. So Wollheim offers here a kind of phenomenological description of an experience without purporting to give something like an analysis into simpler components. So I hope now you see that there are two approaches that we have to this question, what is seeing in? The one approach tries to analyze the phenomena of seeing in into simpler components, components that we have a better grasp on already. The other approach resists that kind of analysis and takes seeing in basically as something like a mental primitive, something that exists in the mind as a natural capacity, a capacity that we can describe and we can tell something about what it's like to exercise the capacity, so to have that experience, but that doesn't really allow for that kind of breakdown into simpler elements.